The rope bit into Victoria Nash's wrists as she hauled another bucket of wash water from the creek, her back screaming in protest at the endless labor that defined her existence in Murphy's, California, in the summer of 1878. She was 22 years old and felt like she had lived 100 lifetimes, each one filled with mockery and dismissal from everyone who knew her secret shame. Victoria Nash believed in true love. The other women in town thought her ridiculous. Sarah Hendricks had laughed right in her face just last week when Victoria mentioned wanting to find a husband who loved her for who she was, not just for what she could do around a homestead. "Love?" Sarah had cackled, slapping her knee with exaggerated mirth. "Girl, you better wake up from that fairy tale before you end up a spinster washing other people's linens for the rest of your miserable life." The words had stung because Victoria was already washing other people's linens. Her father had died 3 years ago in a mining accident, and her mother had followed him to the grave just 6 months later from fever. Victoria had been left with nothing but debts and a ramshackle cabin on the edge of town. She took in washing, mended clothes, and sometimes helped at the general store when Mrs. Patterson needed extra hands. It was not the life she had dreamed of as a girl, reading her mother's tattered romance novels by candlelight. Victoria dumped the water into the large basin behind her cabin and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. The California sun was merciless in August, beating down on the dry earth and turning everything golden and dusty. She could hear the sounds of Murphy's in the distance, horses neighing, men shouting, the irregular hammer strikes from the blacksmith's forge. It was a mining town, rough and ready, filled with men seeking fortune and women trying to survive. She had just bent to retrieve another bucket when she heard the thundering of hooves approaching fast. Victoria straightened, shading her eyes against the glare, and saw a rider coming hard down the dirt road that led past her property. The horse was magnificent, a paint stallion with distinctive markings, and the man riding it sat his saddle like he had been born there. The rider pulled up suddenly, the horse dancing sideways as he controlled it with expert hands. Victoria could see him better now. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a worn brown hat. His face was tanned from sun and wind, with strong features and startling blue-green eyes that looked right at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Pardon me, miss," he called out, his voice deep and pleasant despite the urgency in his tone. "I'm looking for the Hendricks Ranch. Would you happen to know where it lies?" Victoria pointed west, trying to ignore the way her heart had started beating faster. "About 3 miles that way. Follow the creek until you see the split oak, then head north. You cannot miss it." The cowboy tipped his hat to her, but instead of riding off immediately, he seemed to study her face for a moment. "Much obliged," he said slowly. "Name's Knox Xerxes. I'm the new foreman Sarah Hendricks hired on." Of course he was. Of course the most handsome man Victoria had ever laid eyes on would be working for the woman who delighted in mocking her dreams. Life had a cruel sense of humor. "Victoria Nash," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Welcome to Murphy's." Knox Xerxes nodded, still watching her with those remarkable eyes. "You live out here alone?" It was forward of him to ask, but Victoria sensed genuine concern rather than impropriety. "I manage well enough," she said, lifting her chin. "The town is close." Something flickered across his face, respect perhaps, before he gathered his reins. "Well, Miss Nash, I hope we meet again soon." He touched his hat brim once more and urged the paint into a canter, heading in the direction she had indicated. Victoria stood there long after he had disappeared from view, her hands still gripping the empty bucket, her mind replaying the way he had looked at her. Not with pity or amusement like the other men in town, but with something else entirely. Interest, maybe. Curiosity. She shook herself mentally and returned to her work. She could not afford foolish fantasies about handsome cowboys, especially ones who worked for Sarah Hendricks. That way lay nothing but heartache and more mockery. But that night, lying on her thin mattress in the stifling heat of her cabin, Victoria could not stop thinking about Knox Xerxes and the way he had said her name. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Victoria was hanging sheets on the line when she heard a buggy approaching. She turned to see Mrs. Patterson from the general store pulling up in her small rig. "Victoria, dear," the older woman called out, her round face flushed from the heat. "I have a proposition for you." Victoria wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. "Mrs.?" Patterson was one of the few people in town who treated her with genuine kindness. "What can I do for you, madam?" "The church social is next Saturday, and we need someone to help with the food preparation and serving. It pays $2 for the day, and you would get to eat your fill as well. Would you be interested?" $2 was good money, more than Victoria usually made in a week of washing, but she knew what the church social really was. An excuse for the unmarried women to parade themselves in front of eligible men, while the married women gossiped and judged. Victoria had endured 3 of these events since her mother died, each one more humiliating than the last. Still, she needed the money. "I would be happy to help," Victoria said quietly. "Mrs.?" Patterson beamed. "Wonderful. And Victoria, you should wear your blue dress, the one your mother made. It brings out your eyes beautifully." Victoria felt a pang of affection for the older woman. "I will be there to help with the food, Mrs. Patterson. I am not there to catch a husband." "And why not?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her expression turning serious. "You are a lovely young woman with a good heart. You deserve happiness just as much as anyone." "The men here do not see me that way," Victoria replied, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "I am just the poor Nash girl who takes in washing." "Then they are fools," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "But mark my words, the right man will see you for exactly who you are. You just have to keep your heart open." Victoria wanted to believe her, wanted to cling to that hope, but years of disappointment had taught her to guard her dreams carefully. The days leading up to the church social passed in their usual rhythm of hard work and solitude. Victoria saw Knox Xerxes twice more from a distance, once riding through town with several other Hendricks ranch hands, and once at the general store when she was delivering mended shirts to Mrs. Patterson. Both times he had noticed her and nodded, and both times Victoria had felt that same unsettling flutter in her chest. She tried to tell herself it meant nothing. Men like Knox Xerxes did not fall for women like her. He probably had a sweetheart somewhere, or his eye on one of the prettier, wealthier girls in town. Victoria was nobody, nothing special, just another struggling woman in a hard land. But she could not quite extinguish the tiny flame of hope that flickered stubbornly in her heart. Saturday arrived hot and cloudless. Victoria put on her blue dress, the one her mother had sewn with such care 3 years ago. It was simple but well made, and it did bring out the violet blue of her eyes. She braided her long, dark hair and pinned it up, allowing a few tendrils to escape and frame her face. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror that hung in her cabin and saw a woman who was tired but not broken, worn but not defeated. The church grounds were already bustling with activity when Victoria arrived. Long tables had been set up in the shade of several large oaks, and women were arranging dishes of food while children ran between them, shrieking with delight. Men stood in clusters, smoking and talking, occasionally casting appraising glances at the unmarried women. Victoria went immediately to the food tables and began helping Mrs. Patterson arrange the various pies, cakes, and savory dishes that had been contributed. She kept her head down and focused on her work, trying to ignore the whispers and giggles from some of the younger women. "Did you hear?" one of them said loudly enough for Victoria to hear. "Sarah Hendricks brought her entire crew today, including that new foreman, the handsome one." "Knox Xerxes," another girl sighed dramatically. "I heard he came all the way from Texas. They say he can handle the wildest horses and once fought off 3 bandits single-handed." "Well, I intend to make sure he notices me," the first girl declared. "I am going to sit right next to him during the meal." Victoria felt her stomach twist, but kept her expression neutral. Of course Knox would be here. Of course every unmarried woman in town would be throwing themselves at him. Why had she allowed herself even a moment of fantasy? The meal was called, and everyone began finding seats at the long tables. Victoria stayed busy serving and refilling dishes, grateful for the excuse to remain in motion, rather than having to sit and watch the social dynamics play out. She could see Knox seated near Sarah Hendricks and several other ranch hands, and true to her word, Melissa Daniels had positioned herself right next to him, leaning close and laughing at everything he said. Victoria focused on her work, moving efficiently between the tables with pitchers of lemonade and sweet tea. She was refilling glasses at the far end when she heard Sarah Hendricks's voice ring out clearly. "Victoria, come here a moment." Every head turned to look, and Victoria felt heat flood her cheeks. She set down the pitcher and walked slowly to where Sarah sat, aware of every eye following her. Yes, Mrs. Hendricks. Sarah's smile was all sweetness, but her eyes glittered with malice. I was just telling Mr. Xerxes here about our little community. He was asking if there were any eligible young women in town, and I mentioned that you are still unmarried. She paused for effect. Of course, I also explained that you have such romantic notions about love and marriage that you have turned down perfectly good proposals. Several people laughed, and Victoria felt humiliation burn through her. She had not turned down any proposals. No one had ever asked. Is that so? Knox Xerxes said quietly, and something in his tone made Victoria look directly at him for the first time. His expression was not mocking. If anything, he looked angry, but not at her. I believe in love, yes, Victoria said, lifting her chin and meeting his gaze. I do not think that is something to be ashamed of, regardless of what others may think. Neither do I, Knox said firmly. He turned to look at Sarah Hendricks with an expression that made the older woman's smile falter. In fact, I would say that holding out for true love shows remarkable strength of character. Too many people settle for convenience or money and end up miserable. The laughter died away, replaced by uncomfortable silence. Melissa Daniels looked like she had swallowed something sour. Knox stood up from the table in one fluid motion. Miss Nash, would you do me the honor of taking a walk with me? That is, if you are finished with your duties here. Victoria's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. She glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who nodded encouragingly. I would like that, Mr. Xerxes, Victoria managed to say. He offered her his arm, and she took it, aware of the stunned faces watching them, as they walked away from the tables toward the quieter area near the church. Victoria could hardly believe what was happening. Knox Xerxes had just publicly defended her and asked to walk with her, essentially announcing to the entire town that he found her interesting. They walked in silence for a moment, Victoria acutely aware of the solid strength of his arm beneath her hand, the way he matched his stride to hers. I apologize if I overstepped, Knox said finally, but I could not sit there and listen to that woman humiliate you for sport. You did not overstep, Victoria replied softly. Thank you for what you said, though I fear you have just made yourself very unpopular with your employer and half the unmarried women in Murphy's. Knox laughed, a rich, warm sound that made something inside Victoria's chest expand. I have never been much concerned with popularity. I care more about doing what is right. They reached a wooden bench beneath a sprawling oak, and Knox gestured for her to sit. He settled beside her, removing his hat and turning it in his hands. Tell me about yourself, Victoria Nash, he said. Why does a woman who believes in love spend her days washing other people's clothes in a town that seems determined to crush that belief out of her? The directness of the question caught Victoria off guard. She was not used to people caring about her story, her thoughts, her dreams. My parents died, she said simply. They left debts. I had no other family, no skills except the ones my mother taught me. So, I do what I must to survive. She paused, then added with surprising honesty. But I have not let survival kill the part of me that still believes in something more. My mother and father loved each other deeply, truly. I saw it every day of my childhood. That kind of love is real, and I refuse to settle for anything less, even if it means I spend my life alone. Knox was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with those remarkable eyes. You are not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? I do not know, but not this. Not someone so strong and certain and unwilling to compromise on what matters most. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. I think you might be the most courageous person I have met in a long time. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. I am just a woman trying to make her way in the world. No, Knox said gently. You are much more than that. They talked for over an hour, sitting on that bench while the social continued without them. Knox told her about growing up in Texas, the son of a rancher who had lost everything to drought and debt. He had been working cattle drives and ranches since he was 15, moving from place to place, never quite finding anywhere that felt like home. He spoke of his love for horses, his respect for the land, his own belief that life should be about more than just surviving. Victoria found herself opening up in ways she never had before, sharing her memories of her parents, her struggles since their deaths, her secret dreams of finding not just love, but partnership, someone who would see her as an equal rather than a burden or a convenience. When the shadows grew long and the social began to break up, Knox walked Victoria back toward the main gathering. Before they rejoined the others, he stopped and looked down at her seriously. "Miss Nash, I would very much like to call on you properly. Would you allow that?" Victoria's breath caught. "Mr. Xerxes, you work for Sarah Hendricks. She will make your life difficult if you court me. I am not worth that trouble." "Let me be the judge of what you are worth," Knox said firmly. "And please, call me Knox. May I have permission to court you, Victoria?" She knew it was foolish. She knew it would bring more mockery, more hardship. But looking into his eyes, Victoria saw something she had been searching for her entire life. Someone who looked at her and saw not a burden or an object of pity, but a woman of value. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, you may." The smile that spread across Knox's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He took her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "Then I will call on you tomorrow afternoon, if that suits you." Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked back to the church grounds together, and if the stares and whispers bothered Knox, he gave no sign. He helped her into Mrs. Patterson's buggy, which the kind woman had offered to drive Victoria home in, and stood watching until they pulled away. Mrs. Patterson was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. "Victoria, that man is absolutely smitten with you. Did you see how he looked at you?" "Please do not get your hopes up," Victoria said, though her own heart was soaring. "It was just one conversation. He may change his mind." "That man is not going to change his mind," Mrs. Patterson said with certainty. "Mark my words, dear. Your life just changed today." Victoria wanted to believe her, but she had learned long ago that hope was a dangerous thing. Knox came to her cabin the next afternoon, carrying wildflowers he had picked from the meadow near the Hendricks ranch. Victoria invited him in for tea, acutely aware of how shabby her little home must look to someone who worked on a prosperous ranch. But Knox did not seem to notice the threadbare furniture or the patches in the curtains. He only had eyes for her. They sat at her small table and talked for hours, the conversation flowing as easily as it had the day before. Knox told her about his favorite horse, a mare named Rosie, who had been his constant companion for 5 years. Victoria shared her love of reading, showing him her small collection of books, most inherited from her mother. "I have not read much," Knox admitted, looking at the worn volumes with interest. "Never had much opportunity for schooling, but I would like to learn, if you would be willing to teach me." The request touched Victoria deeply. So many men dismissed reading and education as unimportant, but Knox recognized their value. "I would be honored," she said softly. As the afternoon light turned golden, Knox reluctantly rose to leave. "I have to get back to the ranch for evening chores, but, Victoria, may I see you again soon?" "I would like that very much." Knox took her hand gently. "I meant what I said yesterday. I intend to court you properly if you will have me. I know it has only been 2 days, but I have never felt this way about anyone before. There is something between us, something real and true. I want to explore it, to see where it leads." Victoria felt tears slip down her cheeks before she could stop them. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have been waiting my whole life to feel this." Knox reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. The tenderness of the gesture nearly undid her completely. "Then we will face whatever comes together," he said firmly. "I do not care what Sarah Hendricks or anyone else in this town thinks. You are worth fighting for, Victoria Nash." After he left, Victoria stood in her doorway, watching him ride away on his beautiful paint horse, her heart full to bursting. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to truly believe that her dreams of love might actually come true. The next few weeks were the happiest of Victoria's life. Knox came to see her whenever his duties allowed, which was usually 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes they would walk along the creek, talking about everything and nothing. Other times they would sit in her cabin while Victoria read to him, Knox listening with rapt attention as she brought stories to life with her voice. He helped her with the heavy work around her property, fixing the fence that had been falling down for over a year, repairing the leaking roof before the fall rains came. Victoria protested that he did not have to do these things, but Knox insisted. "Let me care for you," he said simply. "It brings me joy." The town watched their courtship with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. Sarah Hendricks was furious, according to Mrs. Patterson, who heard everything through the store's gossip network. The ranch owner had apparently expected Knox to court her daughter, a sullen girl named Prudence who had just returned from finishing school in San Francisco. Sarah threatened to dismiss him, Mrs. Patterson reported one afternoon when Victoria stopped by the store. But Knox apparently told her that she was welcome to do so, and he would simply find work elsewhere. The nerve of it, and the romantic gesture. The older woman sighed happily. That man is absolutely besotted with you, dear. Victoria could hardly believe it herself. Every day with Knox felt like a gift, a dream she was terrified of waking from. He treated her with such respect, such genuine care and affection, that sometimes she had to pinch herself to remember it was real. One evening in mid-September, Knox arrived at her cabin looking troubled. Victoria ushered him inside immediately, concern flooding through her. "What is wrong?" she asked, guiding him to a chair. Knox ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Victoria had come to recognize as a sign of agitation. "Sarah Hendricks gave me an ultimatum today. Either I stop courting you and start showing interest in Prudence, or I lose my position as foreman." Victoria's heart sank. "Knox, you cannot throw away your job for me. Foreman positions are rare and well-paying. You would be foolish to give that up." Knox looked at her with such intensity that she fell silent. "Victoria, listen to me carefully. I have been drifting from place to place for years, never finding anywhere I wanted to stay, anyone I wanted to stay for. Then I met you, and suddenly everything changed. You are not just some passing fancy to me. You are the future I want, the life I want to build." He took her hands in his. "I am going to tell Sarah Hendricks tomorrow that I am done working for her. I will find something else. Even if it is just day labor, I would rather muck out stables and barely scrape by than give you up." "But Knox," Victoria protested, even as her heart soared at his words. "Where will you live? The foreman position came with lodging at the ranch. I will figure something out. Maybe I can build a lean-to somewhere or find a room in town." He squeezed her hands. "It does not matter, as long as I can still see you." Victoria made a decision in that moment, one that would have scandalized the entire town, but felt absolutely right to her. "Stay here," she said firmly. "Stay with me." Knox's eyes widened. "Victoria, I cannot. Your reputation would be ruined." "My reputation is already questionable in this town's eyes, but we could make it proper." She took a deep breath, hardly believing her own boldness. "Marry me, Knox Xerxes. Not someday in the distant future, but now. Soon. We have known each other for a month, and I am more certain of you than I have been of anything in my life. If you feel the same, if this is real for you too, then marry me." For a moment Knox just stared at her, and Victoria felt panic start to rise. She had been too forward, too presumptuous. Men were supposed to propose, not women, and she had just made a terrible fool of herself. Then Knox laughed, a joyous sound that filled the small cabin. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her right off her feet and spinning her around. "Yes," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "Yes, Victoria Nash, I will marry you. I would have asked you myself in another week. I have just been trying to figure out how to do it properly, without a ring or money for a nice wedding." "I do not need any of that," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face, but this time from pure happiness. "I just need you." Knox cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Victoria's first kiss, and it felt like everything she had ever dreamed of, and more. They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Murphy's. Mrs. Patterson stood as witness, crying happy tears throughout the brief ceremony. The only other person present was the blacksmith, Tom Morrison, who Knox had befriended during his short time in town. Sarah Hendricks had made good on her threat and dismissed Knox the day after he refused her ultimatum. But true to his word, Knox had not seemed troubled by it. He had already lined up day work with several smaller ranchers in the area, and Tom Morrison had offered to let him learn blacksmithing in exchange for help around the forge. "A man who can work with horses and metal will never go hungry in this territory," Tom had said with a knowing wink. After the ceremony, Mrs. Patterson hosted a small celebration at her home behind the general store. She had baked a cake and insisted on opening a bottle of wine she had been saving for a special occasion. Tom toasted the couple's happiness, and Mrs. Patterson gave Victoria a beautiful quilt she had made herself. "Every bride needs a wedding gift," she said firmly when Victoria tried to protest. "You two are going to have a wonderful life together. I just know it." As the sun set, Knox carried Victoria over the threshold of her little cabin, which was now their home. They stood in the golden light, filtering through the windows, wrapped in each other's arms, and Victoria felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. "Are you sure about this?" Knox asked softly, stroking her hair. "I am not giving you an easy life. I have no money, no property, no prospects beyond what I can earn with my hands. You deserve so much more." Victoria pulled back to look into his eyes. "You are giving me exactly what I dreamed of. What everyone said was impossible. You are giving me true love, Knox. That is worth more than all the money and property in the world." Knox kissed her again, deeper this time. And Victoria felt the world fall away until there was only the two of them, only this moment, only this perfect beginning to the life they would build together. The early months of their marriage were not easy. Money was scarce, and Knox worked long hours doing whatever jobs he could find. Victoria continued taking in washing and mending, and together they managed to keep food on the table and the cabin maintained. But despite the hardships, Victoria had never been happier. She loved waking up next to Knox every morning, loved the way he kissed her forehead before leaving for work, loved coming home to find him already there, tired but always smiling when he saw her. They talked endlessly, sharing their thoughts and dreams and fears. Knox was learning to read with remarkable speed, and most evenings found them curled together while Victoria guided him through whatever book they were sharing. The town gradually adjusted to their marriage. Some people, like Sarah Hendricks, remained coldly disapproving. Others, particularly the older couples who remembered their own young love, treated them with warmth and respect. But Knox and Victoria did not particularly care either way. They had each other, and that was enough. In November, Tom Morrison offered Knox a partnership in the blacksmith business. "My hands are not what they used to be," the older man admitted. "I need help with the heavier work. If you are willing to learn the trade properly, I will teach you everything I know. We can split the profits 50-50. It was an incredible opportunity. Blacksmiths were essential in any frontier town, and the work was steady and well paid. Knox accepted immediately, and Victoria saw a new excitement in his eyes. He had finally found not just work, but a trade, something he could build a future on. By Christmas, their fortunes had improved noticeably. Knox was bringing in regular money from the blacksmith shop, and Victoria had started selling baked goods in addition to her washing and mending services. Mrs. Patterson gave her a corner of the general store to display her pies and cakes, and they sold quickly. Victoria's mother had been an excellent baker, and she had passed on all her skills and recipes. On Christmas morning, Knox surprised Victoria with a gift. It was a small wooden box he had made himself, inlaid with different types of wood in a beautiful pattern. Inside was a gold ring with a tiny sapphire. "It is not much," Knox said nervously as Victoria stared at the ring with tears in her eyes. "But I wanted you to have a proper wedding ring. Tom helped me pick it out from the jewelry that comes through the store. The sapphire reminded me of your eyes." Victoria threw her arms around him, overcome with emotion. "It is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much, Knox." "I love you too," he murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." They spent Christmas Day quietly at home, cooking together and laughing and making love by the fire. It was simple and perfect and everything Victoria had ever dreamed of. As winter gave way to spring, Victoria began to suspect she might be pregnant. The thought filled her with equal parts joy and terror. A baby would be wonderful, but they were still struggling financially, still living in a cabin that was barely big enough for 2 people, let alone a child. When she finally gathered the courage to tell Knox, he reacted exactly as she should have known he would. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with delight, then immediately became serious and concerned. "Are you all right? Do you need to see the doctor? Should you be working so hard? Maybe you should stop taking in washing." Victoria laughed at his sudden protectiveness. "Knox, I am pregnant, not dying. Women have been having babies and continuing their work since the beginning of time. I will be fine." But Knox would not be dissuaded. He insisted on taking over the heaviest chores and fussed over her constantly, making sure she was eating enough and resting enough. It was sweet and sometimes exasperating, but Victoria loved him all the more for his concern. Tom Morrison was delighted by the news and immediately gave Knox a raise. "A man with a family needs to provide," he said gruffly. "Besides, you have more than earned it. The business has never been better." It was true. Under Knox's strong hands and growing skill, the blacksmith shop had flourished. Ranchers from all over the region brought their horses to be shod and their tools to be repaired or made. Knox had a gift for the work, a natural understanding of metal and heat, and the precise strikes needed to shape iron into useful objects. As Victoria's belly grew, Knox began building an addition onto their cabin. With Tom's help and some assistance from other men in town who had come to respect the young couple, they added 2 new rooms, a bedroom for them and a nursery for the baby. It was hard work done in the evenings and on Sundays, but by the time summer arrived, the expansion was complete. Mrs. Patterson organized a quilting bee to make baby blankets and clothes. Even some of the women who had once mocked Victoria participated, won over by the obvious love between her and Knox and the couple's determination to build a good life despite their difficult start. Sarah Hendricks remained a holdout, still bitter that Knox had chosen poverty with Victoria over prosperity with her daughter. But Prudence Hendricks herself surprised everyone by stopping Victoria on the street one day in July. "Miss Nash, Mrs. Xerxes," the younger woman said awkwardly. "I wanted to apologize for my mother's behavior. The truth is, I never had any interest in Mr. Xerxes, and I told my mother as much. She was just being controlling and manipulative, as she always is." Prudence paused, then added quietly, "I think what you and your husband have is beautiful. I hope someday I find someone who looks at me the way he looks at you." Victoria was touched by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Prudence. That means more than you know." The baby came in late September, during a warm, golden afternoon, when the world smelled of dry grass and distant pine smoke from the mountains. Victoria's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when she wondered if she would survive it. Knox stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, his face pale with worry. When the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Victoria's arms, Knox wept openly. "A son?" he said in wonder, touching the baby's tiny hand with one work-roughened finger. "We have a son, Victoria." They named him Kenneth Xerxes, and he was the most beautiful thing Victoria had ever seen. He had Knox's dark hair, and when he finally opened his eyes a few days later, Victoria's blue eyes. Knox was utterly besotted with his son, spending every free moment holding him and talking to him and marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. "I never thought I could love anything as much as I love you," Knox told Victoria one night as they watched Kenneth sleep in his cradle. "But somehow my heart just expanded to fit him too. How is that possible?" Victoria smiled and leaned against her husband's shoulder. "That is the nature of love. It does not divide. It multiplies." Life with a baby was exhausting and chaotic and absolutely wonderful. Victoria discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, managing the baby and the household, and even continuing some of her baking, though she had given up the washing work for now. Knox worked harder than ever, driven by his determination to provide for his family. By Kenneth's first birthday, they had saved enough money to buy a piece of land just outside town. It was not large, only 10 acres, but it had good water and enough room for a proper house and maybe some livestock. Knox and Tom were already making plans to build a new home there, something solid and permanent that would last for generations. The town of Murphys had fully embraced the Xerxes family by then. Even Sarah Hendricks had softened somewhat, particularly after Prudence had eloped with a banker from Sacramento, leaving her mother to face the fact that she could not control her daughter's life any more than she could have controlled Knox's. On a crisp October afternoon, Victoria stood on their new land, holding Kenneth in her arms, while Knox and Tom and several other men from town worked on framing the new house. Mrs. Patterson stood beside her, both women watching the progress with satisfaction. "You have done well for yourself, dear," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "Look at everything you have built in just 2 years." Victoria looked at her husband, swinging a hammer in the afternoon sunlight, then down at her son, who was babbling happily and trying to grab at her necklace. She thought about the lonely, mocked woman she had been such a short time ago, washing other people's clothes and dreaming of a love that everyone told her was impossible. "I did not build it alone," Victoria said softly. "Knox and I built it together. That is what makes it real." The house took several months to complete, but by spring they were able to move in. It was a beautiful structure, solid and well-made, with 4 rooms and a real glass window in the front parlor that Knox had special ordered from San Francisco. Victoria cried when she first walked through the finished home, overwhelmed by how much their lives had changed. They planted a garden and bought chickens and a milk cow. Knox had saved enough to purchase 2 horses as well, a mare for breeding and a young stallion he planned to train and sell. He had a gift with horses that had not gone unnoticed, and several ranchers had already approached him about breaking their wild stock. "I think we could make good money with horses," Knox told Victoria one evening as they sat on the porch of their new home watching the sun set over the mountains. "Between the blacksmithing and horse training, we could build something really substantial, maybe even buy more land eventually." "I would like that," Victoria agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. Kenneth was asleep in her lap, his small body warm and heavy. "But Knox, I want you to know that even if we never have more than this, I am happy, truly happy. You gave me everything I ever dreamed of." Knox turned to kiss her temple. "You gave me the same, Victoria. Before I met you, I was just drifting, not really living. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You gave me a home." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. A coyote called in the distance, and the horses nickered softly in their pen. It was a moment of perfect peace, the kind that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be. The years passed with the gentle rhythm of family life. Kenneth grew into a bright, active boy who loved following his father around and asking endless questions about everything he saw. When he was 3, Victoria became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Virginia Nash Xerxes, after Victoria's mother. Knox was just as amazed by his daughter as he had been by his son, holding her with infinite gentleness and declaring her the most beautiful baby ever born. Kenneth was fascinated by his new sister and wanted to help with everything, from changing her clothes to singing her lullabies. The horse business had flourished beyond their initial hopes. Knox had a reputation throughout the region as someone who could gentle the wildest horses without breaking their spirit. He worked with patience and respect, treating each animal as an individual, and the results spoke for themselves. Ranchers were willing to pay premium prices for horses trained by Knox Xerxes. The blacksmith shop continued to thrive as well. Tom Morrison had officially made Knox a full partner, and they had even hired an apprentice, a young man named David who showed real promise with metalwork. Tom was getting older and had started talking about retirement, hinting that he would likely sell his half of the business to Knox when the time came. Victoria's baking business had grown too. She now supplied pies and cakes not just to the general store, but to the hotel restaurant and several private households. She had even trained 2 women in town to help her, creating employment for others who needed it. She remembered too well what it was like to struggle alone, and was determined to help other women whenever she could. In 1883, they bought an additional 20 acres adjacent to their property. They were able to build a proper barn and expand their horse operation. Knox hired a hand to help with the daily work, a quiet man named Joseph, who had a way with animals and proved to be a reliable employee. Kenneth started school that year, walking into town each morning with his lunch pail and slate. He was bright and eager to learn, much to Victoria's delight. She had continued teaching Knox to read and write, and now father and son often did their lessons together in the evening, both of them bent over books while Virginia played at their feet. Life was not without its challenges. There were years when drought affected the grass, and they had to buy expensive feed for the horses. There were illnesses and injuries, including a frightening incident when Kenneth fell from a horse and broke his arm. There were moments of financial stress when unexpected expenses arose or business slowed. But through it all, Victoria and Knox faced everything together. They had built not just a successful enterprise, but a true partnership, one based on mutual respect and unwavering love. They made decisions together, supported each other's dreams, and never went to bed angry with each other. The town of Murphys had grown and changed over the years. New people arrived, drawn by the opportunities in mining and ranching. The railroad had come through 20 miles to the south, making it easier to ship goods and receive supplies. But the small community maintained its character, and the Xerxes family remained at its heart. Mrs. Patterson had retired from the general store, selling it to a young couple from the east, but she remained a close friend and an honorary grandmother to Kenneth and Virginia. Tom Morrison did eventually retire, selling his half of the blacksmith business to Knox for a fair price and moving to San Francisco to live with his daughter. Sarah Hendricks had also left town after selling her ranch and following Prudence to Sacramento. Before she left, she had surprised everyone by visiting Victoria. "I owe you an apology," the older woman had said stiffly. "I was cruel to you when you deserved kindness. I was trying to control things that were not mine to control, and I hurt people in the process. I am sorry." Victoria had accepted the apology with grace, understanding that it took courage to admit such failures. "We all make mistakes, Mrs. Hendricks. I appreciate you saying this." It was a small moment, but it represented a kind of closure, a healing of old wounds. By 1885, the Xerxes family was among the most respected in the region. Their ranch, though not the largest, was known for producing excellent horses. Knox's skill as a blacksmith was legendary, and Victoria's baked goods were sought after throughout the territory. But more than their business success, they were known for their kindness and integrity. They hired people who needed work and paid fair wages. They helped neighbors in times of trouble and opened their home to anyone who needed a meal or a place to stay. They raised their children with love and discipline, teaching them the value of hard work and the importance of treating all people with respect. One evening in late summer, Victoria and Knox sat on their porch after putting the children to bed. Virginia was now 3, a curly-haired whirlwind of energy and opinions. Kenneth was 7, already showing signs of inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's love of learning. "Do you ever think about that day at the church social?" Victoria asked, taking Knox's hand. "When you asked me to walk with you?" Knox smiled in the gathering darkness. "I think about it often. I think about how close I came to never meeting you at all. If I had not taken that particular job, if I had not stopped to ask you for directions, if I had let Sarah Hendricks intimidate me." He shook his head. "So many small choices that led to this life. I think we were meant to find each other," Victoria said softly. "I spent so many years being told that my dreams were foolish, that true love was a fantasy. But it was real, Knox. It is real. What we have proves it." Knox pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You were the bravest person I ever met, Victoria. You refused to settle, refused to let the world convince you to accept less than what you knew in your heart was possible. You inspired me to be braver too, to reach for something more than just existing." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the horses moving in the barn, an owl calling from the trees. The sky was brilliant with stars, that vast canopy that stretched over everything, witnessing their story and countless others playing out beneath it. "I am grateful," Victoria said finally, "for every moment, even the hard ones, because they all led us here, to this life we built together." "I am grateful too," Knox replied, "every single day." Inside the house, one of the children called out in sleep, and Victoria rose to check on them. Knox followed her, and together they stood in the doorway of the children's room, watching Kenneth and Virginia sleep peacefully in their beds. This was their legacy, their future, these two small people who would carry forward the lessons of love and perseverance they had learned. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. In 1887, Victoria gave birth to their 3rd child, another boy they named Kevin. He was an easy baby, happy and content, and both Kenneth and Virginia doted on their new brother. The ranch continued to expand. They bought more land and bred more horses. Knox's reputation had spread far beyond Murphy's, and they had customers coming from as far as Nevada and Oregon to purchase their stock. Knox had developed a particular line of horses that were known for their intelligence, endurance, and gentle temperament. They commanded premium prices and were in constant demand. Victoria had shifted her focus somewhat as the children grew. She still baked, but had turned most of the daily production over to the women she had trained. Instead, she found herself drawn to writing. She began documenting the stories of women in the region, their struggles and triumphs, their dreams and disappointments. She had no idea if anyone would ever want to read what she wrote, but the act of recording these lives felt important. Knox encouraged her completely, just as she had always encouraged his dreams. He built her a small office in their home, a quiet space with a desk and shelves for her growing collection of papers and books. On her birthday, he surprised her with a beautiful leather journal embossed with her initials. "For all the stories you are going to tell," he said, kissing her softly. Kenneth was 10 now and already working alongside his father with the horses. He had his father's natural gift and his mother's patient intelligence. Virginia was 6, bright and bold and afraid of nothing. She declared regularly that she was going to be a horse trainer just like her father, despite the fact that it was not considered proper work for a woman. Knox told her she could be anything she wanted to be, and Victoria backed him completely. Kevin was still just a toddler, but already showing signs of being a studious, thoughtful child. He loved being read to and could sit for hours looking at picture books. The family took trips together when they could, visiting San Francisco and Sacramento, showing the children the wider world beyond their ranch. But they always returned home with relief and pleasure. This land, this place they had built together, was where they belonged. In 1890, on their 12th wedding anniversary, Knox took Victoria back to Murphy's for a special dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was the fanciest place in town, and they dressed in their best clothes for the occasion. The children stayed home with Mrs. Patterson, who still lived in town and never missed an opportunity to spend time with her honorary grandchildren. Sitting across the table from Knox, Victoria marveled at how he had changed and yet remained the same. There was silver now in his dark hair, and lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. His hands were scarred from his work, permanent marks of his trade, but his eyes still held that same intensity, that same deep warmth when he looked at her. "You are even more beautiful now than the day I met you," Knox said, as if reading her thoughts. Victoria laughed. "I am older and rounder and marked by childbearing. You do not have to flatter me, husband." "It is not flattery, it is truth." Knox reached across the table to take her hand. "Every year with you has been a gift, Victoria. Every challenge we have faced, every joy we have shared, it has all made this life richer than I ever imagined possible." "You made my dreams come true," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "Everyone laughed at me for believing in true love. They said I was a fool, that I should settle for whatever I could get, but you proved them all wrong. You showed me that the dream was worth holding on to." Knox raised his glass. "To dreams coming true, and to the woman brave enough to believe in them." They toasted and talked and laughed, celebrating not just their anniversary, but the entire journey they had taken together. From that first meeting on a dusty road to this moment of plenty and peace, it had been a remarkable path. As they walked home under the stars, Knox pulled Victoria close. "Do you know what my favorite part of all this is?" he asked. "What?" "Every morning I wake up, and for a moment I'm amazed all over again that you were there beside me. I have never taken you for granted, Victoria, not for a single day." Victoria stopped walking and turned to face him. She reached up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you, Knox Xerxes. I loved you from almost the first moment I met you, and I will love you until I draw my last breath." They kissed there on the road, under the vast expanse of stars, just as in love as they had been 12 years ago. Maybe more so, because now their love was deepened by shared history, by children raised and challenges overcome, by a life built stone by stone into something solid and enduring. The 1890s brought more changes. Kenneth, at 14, was doing the work of a man and had started talking about expanding into cattle ranching in addition to the horses. Knox listened to his son's ideas with respect and began teaching him not just the practical work, but the business aspects as well. Virginia, at 11, was proving to be just as skilled with horses as she had claimed she would be. She had a particular gift for working with difficult animals, showing a patience and intuition that impressed even Knox. She had also started helping her mother with the writing project, interviewing women and recording their stories. Kevin, at 6, was learning to read with the same voracious appetite Victoria had shown as a child. He devoured every book they could get him and had started writing his own stories, fantastical tales of adventure and bravery. In 1893, the nation suffered a financial panic that affected even remote areas like Murphy's. Money became tight, and customers were more cautious about their purchases. The Xerxes family had to tighten their belts and make difficult decisions about expenses. But they had weathered hard times before, and did so again. They relied on their savings, carefully built over the good years. They diversified, raising more of their own food and trading services with neighbors. Knox took on more blacksmith work, and Victoria increased her baking again, finding that people might cut back on luxuries but still needed bread and basic goods. Kenneth proved his worth during this difficult period, taking on more responsibility and helping keep the ranch running smoothly. Virginia and Kevin contributed as well, doing chores and helping however they could. The crisis brought the family even closer together, reinforcing the lessons of perseverance and mutual support. By 1895, the economy had begun to recover, and the Xerxes ranch emerged from the difficult period stronger than before. They had proven they could survive hard times, and that knowledge gave them confidence for whatever might come. It was in the spring of 1896 that Victoria realized she was pregnant again. She was 39 years old, and the pregnancy came as a surprise. Kenneth was 18, Virginia was 14, and Kevin was 9. Victoria had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. Knox was delighted but also concerned given her age. He insisted she take things easy and hired additional help for the household. Victoria found his protectiveness both annoying and endearing, but she had to admit she tired more easily with this pregnancy than she had with the others. The baby, another girl they named Vera, was born in late December 1896, a tiny but healthy infant with a surprisingly loud cry. The older children were enchanted with their baby sister, and even Kenneth, now a young man beginning to court a girl from town, was not too grown up to help with the baby. The turn of the century found the Xerxes family in a state of comfortable prosperity. The ranch had grown to over 100 acres. They ran both horses and a small herd of cattle. Knox still did some blacksmith work, but had largely transitioned to focusing on the ranch and horse breeding. His skills and reputation meant they could command top prices for their stock. Victoria had compiled her women's stories into a manuscript, and to her amazement, a publisher in San Francisco had agreed to print it. The book, titled Voices of the West, Women's Stories from the Frontier, was published in 1901 and received favorable reviews. It did not make them wealthy, but it meant something to Victoria that these stories would be preserved, that these women's lives would be remembered. Kenneth had married his sweetheart, Emily Thomas, in 1899. They lived in a house Knox had helped them build on the far edge of the ranch property. Emily was expecting their first child, which would make Knox and Victoria grandparents for the first time. Virginia, at 19, showed no interest in settling down. She worked the ranch alongside her father and brother, and had declared she intended to start her own horse training business. Knox had given her several horses to start her string, and Victoria had helped her establish the financial and business structure. If people thought it odd for a woman to be in such business, the Xerxes family paid them no mind. Kevin, at 14, had announced his intention to become a teacher. He loved learning and wanted to help others access education. Victoria and Knox fully supported his dream and had started saving for him to attend normal school. Little Vera, at 4, was a joyful child who seemed to find wonder in everything. She had Knox wrapped around her finger, and he spoiled her shamelessly, though Victoria tried to ensure she did not become too entitled. On their 22nd anniversary in 1900, Knox and Victoria took a trip alone together for the first time in years. They traveled to San Francisco for a week, staying in a real hotel and eating in restaurants and going to the theater. It was luxurious and exciting, but both of them found themselves eager to return home to their family and their land. "I think that is the sign of a good life," Victoria mused as their train carried them back toward Murphy's. "When you can enjoy an adventure, but still be eager to return home." Knox squeezed her hand. "Home is wherever you are. But I know what you mean. We have built something special, something worth returning to." The years that followed brought the normal joys and sorrows of life. Kenneth and Emily had 3 children, 2 boys, and a girl. Virginia eventually did marry, at 25, to a fellow horse trainer she met at a stock show. They formed a partnership both personal and professional that mirrored the one Knox and Victoria had built. Kevin went off to normal school and became a teacher as he had planned. He taught at the school in Murphy's, inspiring a new generation of children with his love of learning. Vera grew into a lovely young woman with her father's eyes and her mother's determination. She was the baby of the family, but never acted spoiled, perhaps because her much older siblings kept her grounded. Knox and Victoria aged gracefully together, their hair turned silver, their faces lined with the marks of a life fully lived. Knox's hands became gnarled with arthritis, making it harder to do the detailed blacksmith work he once had, but he could still gentle a horse with the best of them. Victoria's eyes weakened, requiring spectacles for reading, but her mind remained sharp, and she continued writing, recording not just other women's stories now, but her own. In 1910, on their 32nd anniversary, The entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were children and grandchildren everywhere, filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. Kenneth was now a respected rancher in his own right. Virginia ran a successful horse training operation. Kevin had become the principal of the school. Vera, at 14, was already showing signs of inheriting her mother's writing talent. As Victoria looked around at all these people, this family they had created, she was overwhelmed with gratitude. She found Knox standing slightly apart, watching the chaos with a contented smile. "What are you thinking?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "I am thinking about that day I stopped to ask you for directions," Knox said. "About how one moment, one decision, changed everything. If I had not stopped, if I had not noticed you, all of this would not exist. These children, these grandchildren, this whole life we built." "But you did stop," Victoria said softly. "You saw me when others looked past me. You believed in me when others laughed at my dreams. You made everything possible, Knox." Knox turned to face her, his eyes still as intense as they had been 32 years ago. "We made it possible, together. That has always been our strength, Victoria. We are partners, equals, two people who choose each other every single day." Victoria felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I would choose you again and again, in every lifetime, in every world. You are my great love, Knox Xerxes, my true love, the one I was waiting for all along." They stood together, watching their family celebrate, their hands clasped tight. Behind them stretched 32 years of shared history, of struggles overcome and dreams realized. Ahead lay however many years remained to them, and they would face those together as well, just as they had faced everything else. Around them, their children and grandchildren laughed and played and lived their own stories, all of them possible because two people had been brave enough to believe in love when the world told them it was foolish, because a lonely woman had refused to settle for less than her dreams, and a wandering cowboy had recognized that she was worth fighting for. As the sun set over the California mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple, Victoria Nash Xerxes stood in the embrace of the man she loved, surrounded by the family they had created, and knew with absolute certainty that every struggle, every hardship, every moment of doubt had been worth it. She had been laughed at for dreaming of true love, but the cowboy had made every dream come true. Knox and Victoria lived to see their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. They watched the new century unfold with all its changes and challenges. They saw automobiles replace horses on the streets of Murphy's, though the ranch still relied primarily on horsepower for its work. They saw the world change in ways they could never have imagined when they first met. Through it all, their love remained constant, a foundation upon which everything else was built. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or misunderstanding, but they had learned long ago how to talk through difficulties, how to listen with open hearts, how to choose understanding over pride. In 1915, at 60 years old, Knox began to slow down noticeably. The years of hard physical labor had taken their toll on his body. His joints ached, and he tired more easily. Kenneth had taken over most of the daily ranch operations, with his own sons helping as well. Knox still offered advice and guidance, but he was content to step back and let the younger generation lead. Victoria, at 59, remained active despite her own aging body. She walked with a cane now, necessary after a fall had damaged her hip, but her mind was as sharp as ever. She had published 2 more books, both of them well received, and was working on her memoirs. She wanted to record their story, hers and Knox's, to preserve it for their descendants. On warm afternoons, Knox and Victoria would sit on the porch of their home, the same porch where they had spent countless evenings over the years. They would watch the ranch activity, the horses being trained, the cattle being moved, the children playing. Sometimes they talked, reminiscing about the early days or discussing family matters. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, simply being together. "Do you have any regrets?" Victoria asked one day, the question coming from nowhere in particular. Knox considered for a long moment. "I regret that I cannot do the physical work I once could. I regret that my body is giving out before my desire to live has. But regret about my life choices, about marrying you, building this ranch, raising our family?" He shook his head firmly. "Not a single one. This has been a good life, Victoria. A very good life." Victoria smiled, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. For me, too. I have lived exactly the life I dreamed of, loved exactly the way I always believed was possible. You proved everyone wrong, Knox. You proved that true love is not a fantasy. In the spring of 1918, Knox fell ill with influenza. The pandemic that was sweeping the world had reached even remote Murphys, and Knox, at 63, did not have the strength to fight it off. For 2 weeks, he battled the fever while Victoria sat at his bedside, refusing to leave despite the risk to herself. On a cool morning in April, with Victoria holding his hand and their children gathered around, Knox Xerxes drew his last breath. His final words were for his wife. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for this beautiful life." Victoria felt her heart shatter, even as she held herself together for her children. Knox had been her partner for 40 years, her first and only love, the man who had made all her dreams come true. The world without him in it seemed impossibly empty. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Knox had touched so many lives, helped so many people, and they came to pay their respects. They told stories of his kindness, his skill, his integrity. They spoke of how he had treated everyone with respect, regardless of their station in life. They remembered him as a man who kept his word and stood by his principles. Victoria listened to it all with a strange mixture of grief and pride. This was the man she had loved, had chosen, had built a life with. Even in her sorrow, she was grateful for every moment they had shared. The months after Knox's death were the hardest of Victoria's life. She moved through each day mechanically, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. Her children worried about her, but Victoria assured them she was all right. She was not all right, but she would be. Eventually. It was writing that saved her. She threw herself into completing her memoirs, pouring all her grief and love and memories onto the page. She wrote about meeting Knox, about their courtship and marriage, about building the ranch and raising their family. She wrote about the challenges they had faced and overcome together. She wrote about a love that had sustained her for 40 years and would sustain her still, even though he was gone. The book, titled True Love, A Life with Knox Xerxes, was published in 1920. It became her most successful work, touching readers across the country who were drawn to the story of enduring love and partnership. Victoria received letters from women telling her that the book had inspired them to hold out for true love rather than settling. She received letters from men saying it had taught them how to be better husbands and partners. Reading these letters, Victoria felt Knox's presence so strongly. This was part of his legacy, this inspiration to others. Their love story had not ended with his death. It lived on, influencing and inspiring others. Victoria lived for 7 more years after Knox's death. She saw her great-grandchildren grow. She saw the ranch continue to prosper under Kenneth's management. She saw Virginia's horse training business become recognized nationally. She saw Kevin retire from teaching after a distinguished career. She saw Vera marry and begin her own writing career. She spent her final years in peace, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that the life she and Knox had built would continue long after she was gone. The ranch would pass to Kenneth and his children. The stories she had written would preserve the voices and experiences of her generation. And most importantly, the love she and Knox had shared would live on as an example and inspiration. Victoria Nash Xerxes died peacefully in her sleep in November of 1925 at the age of 69. She was buried beside Knox on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children erected a simple stone marker that read, "Knox and Victoria Xerxes, partners in life and love. They prove dreams can come true." In the years that followed, the Xerxes Ranch continued to thrive. Kenneth ran it until his own retirement, then passed it to his sons. Virginia's horse training methods influenced an entire generation of trainers. Kevin's former students went on to become teachers themselves, spreading his love of learning. Vera's books joined her mother's on library shelves, adding to the family's literary legacy. And through it all, the story of Knox and Victoria remained at the heart of the family history. It was told to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, this tale of true love found against all odds. It became a touchstone, a reminder that love was worth believing in, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. The little cabin where they had started their married life was preserved, eventually converted into a small museum that told the story of the early days of the ranch. Visitors could see Victoria's original books, Knox's blacksmith tools, the wooden box he had made to hold her wedding ring. They could read excerpts from Victoria's memoirs and look at photographs of the family through the years. On the anniversary of their wedding each year, the Xerxes descendants gathered at the ranch for a celebration. It became a tradition that honored not just Knox and Victoria, but the values they had embodied: hard work, integrity, mutual respect, and, above all, the transformative power of true love. The world changed dramatically over the decades that followed. The Wild West era that Knox and Victoria had lived through became history, preserved in books and museums. Murphy's evolved from a rough mining town to a quaint tourist destination. Technology advanced beyond anything they could have imagined, but the fundamental truths that Knox and Victoria had discovered remained constant. Love was real, partnership mattered, dreams were worth pursuing, kindness and integrity created lasting legacies. Their story became more than just family history. It became a testament to what was possible when two people chose to believe in something the world told them was foolish. When a woman refused to settle for less than her dreams, and a man was brave enough to fight for her. When two people built a life together based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love. The ranch they founded continued for generations, adapting to changing times but maintaining its core identity as a place where horses were treated with respect and family bonds were cherished. The books Victoria wrote remained in print, her words reaching new readers in each generation. The blacksmith shop Knox had run became a historical landmark, teaching visitors about the crafts and skills of the frontier era. But perhaps their greatest legacy was intangible, the proof that love, real and true, was not just a fantasy from storybooks. It existed in the world if people were brave enough to believe in it and fight for it. Knox and Victoria had shown that path, lighting the way for others to follow. Their love story began with mockery and doubt, with a young woman washing other people's clothes while dreaming of something more, with a cowboy who recognized her worth when others could not see it. It bloomed into a partnership that weathered every storm and celebrated every joy. It created a family that spanned generations. It built a legacy that would endure long after their names were forgotten. In the end, Victoria Nash had been right to hold on to her dreams. True love was real, and Knox Xerxes had proven it to her, day after day, year after year, for 40 beautiful years. He had made every dream come true, and in doing so, had shown that the most powerful force in the world was not gold or land or fame, but the simple, profound connection between two hearts that chose each other and never let go.